Chères téléspectatrices, chers téléspectateurs, c'est une émission aujourd'hui en anglais en raison de mon invité, M. Wendell Marsh, un historien qui travaille sur l'islam et l'Afrique. Welcome, dear Wendell Marsh.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so pleased to be here.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, really. So before really getting into the field of history and what you are completely doing now at the Rutgers University in the US, I would like just to have with you a conversation about your motives, your motivations, your first training, where have you grown up, and also the mobility you had to achieve your research.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, my story, like so many of our stories, actually began in the middle of someone else's. And I always like to tell the story of my father, who only received a high school education, who was really disserved by the education system in the United States, but who had his own kind of curiosity. Anyway, he worked for an aircraft carrier, and his job was to stir paint. And one day while he was working, one of his colleagues, his co-workers, pointed to a plane that had Arabic script writing on it. And his co-worker asked my dad, can you read what's on the plane? And my father looks at him and says, you're crazy. This is a bunch of squiggly lines. How am I supposed to read this? And the man says to him, this is the name of God written. And this was a shock to my father. And he was really interested in what was this man talking about.
He was already practicing religion.
No, he wasn't very religious by any means. He grew up as a Baptist in Atlanta. And he had been in the Air Force. He was born in 1940, and this was around the late 1960s. And this was, as he always told me growing up, a moment of intellectual awakening. Yeah. Because after that moment, he started going to the Nation of Islam Mosque in Atlanta. And they used to have...
Influenced by Malcolm X?
Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. And, there's an entire tradition in the United States.
This period is very interesting because we don't know that much about it.
Yeah.
And we know, of course, big figures as Malcolm X, but there is all a kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, totally. There's a big atmosphere, a lot of different voices. You had Sunni Muslim movements, you had Ahmadiyya movements, very important in African-American communities. And so
about emancipation from all the discrimination?
Absolutely. And for my dad, in his telling, it was also about consciousness.
Okay.
And he always put the emphasis on intellectual opening and consciousness. And so from there, he started studying. For the first time in his life, he said after that moment, he read a book from cover to cover. In all the years of his elementary, high school schooling, he had never read a full book.
And he was reading what?
So with the Nation of Islam, they read history and philosophy and theology, and this was just completely new to him. And so
you grow up in this atmosphere?
Not exactly. This is the funny part. He never was a very religious person. He was never had his...
he converted to Islam?
So he never converts to Islam.
It was only knowledge.
It was only knowledge, and it was a real awakening for him. And so by the time I grew up, many, many years later, the house was full of books.
Okay.
And it was always a very important part of our awareness. And so my immediate family was not religious, and yet the study of religion, of spirituality, of history was very, very important. And so I really inherited that from my father, even though he never received any formal extensive education.
He passed on an atmosphere of knowledge.
Yeah, and in the words of actually my old PhD advisor, Mamadou Diouf, Islam was something of a horizon of consciousness. I think for a lot of African Americans throughout the 20th century.
So, in high school, you were already aware of history and history of this region you will be specialist of? Or?
Not quite.
No.
I did start what we called an Afrocentric book club at my high school.
Okay.
I was a part of an effort to lobby the state of Georgia to make ethnic studies a requirement. We were unsuccessful, but we were organizing and trying to really insist back in the early 2000s that, you know, our histories, our cultures, languages of, you know, communities that we were descended from should be a part of our education. But what really turned things around
what
for me.
was the moment where you start to be completely involved in this kind of history, Islam and Africa?
Yeah, so I think one important moment was I was in college, and I didn't have a lot of direct guidance in my family about what to do in college. And so I figured that, you know, if I just spent as much time as possible in the library, I would learn something. And so all my free time, I would just go to the library. And even if there was an assignment, I would just read. And I remember one day I was looking at the stacks and I saw a book and it was Hegel's Philosophy of History.
Oh, yeah.
And it looked interesting to me. But right not too far from it, there was also a book called Muqaddimah. By Ibn Khaldun.
Ibn Khaldun, yes.
And
so translated?
As the kind of prologema or the introduction of history. So it was in English, in translation.
Franz Rosenthal.
Yeah, Rosenthal, exactly. And I remember the cover to this day. It was a kind of orange and brown cover.
Yes, exactly.
And I had these two books, really, they were very close to each other.
Okay.
And I was interested in both of them. And they just spoke to me. And I was taking a course with Augustine Kone, who's a Liberian historian at Morehouse College, a historically black college.
There are always a kind of encounter in these kind of motivations. Someone said, oh, okay, just look at this. And then it's the beginning of a long involvement or commitment to research.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Malcolm X says that in his autobiography that, you know, one book can change a person's life.
Oh, yes.
And
I agree with that.
Yeah. And so, you know, from these undergraduate courses, I learned about Ghana. I learned about Mali and Songhai and these medieval trade empires. And I was just fascinated. And when I was studying them in my first year history class, I noticed that most of the sources and all the articles I was reading were in Arabic.
Yeah.
And I remembered, you know, everything I had kind of learned growing up, the stories my father told me. My middle name is Hassan, by the way. Right. And so I had this awareness and I started to connect Africa and this longer history that I would eventually come to really define myself by.
And your PhD was at Columbia University?
That's correct, Columbia University.
You did it with
Professor Mamadou Diouf.
Mamadou Diouf, we received him here in this program, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. And what was the title of your PhD?
Yeah, so the dissertation was Compositions of Sainthood.
Wilaya?
Wilaya is all about sainthood, and the biography of Sheikh Musa of Hajj Omar Tal by Sheikh Musa Kamara.
Hajj Omar Tal by
Sheikh Musa Kamara.
Sheikh Musa Kamara.
Yeah.
And the book of Kamara is quite amazing in his title. Yeah. Please share it with us.
Yeah. From the dissertation or his major work?
No, sorry. I was collapsing two things.
Yeah.
First, the biography he did.
Yeah.
That I was just wondering to ask you. I always found that there are so many interesting biographies in 17th, 18th, 19th century in this region. You know. Ahmed ibn Qasim al-Hajari, Moriscos, and many, they start with a kind of biography or afterwards an autobiography.
Right. Yeah. So the dissertation was really about the biography of Hajj Omar, who is a very important Tijani figure.
Did by Sheikh Musa Kamara.
Written by Sheikh Musa Kamara. So Tal was an important Tijani figure in the 19th century. He's famous for really transforming the landscape, religious, intellectual, political, of the Western Sahel, just below the Sahara. And then Sheikh Musa Kamara comes a generation later. He actually is born the same year that Omar dies.
Okay.
And so there's this link between the two.
Yeah.
And I was really interested in this text when I was writing.
The heritage of it.
Absolutely.
On Kamara.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a very important kind of movement. And what you get in a lot of this biographical literature, you know, this idea of a ilm al-rijal, right? The kind of acts and deeds of righteous men, they become models, right? Exemplars of great behavior. And it's really resonant with the much larger tradition we get in medieval Europe and other parts of the world.
Yeah.
of the importance of lives and learning from people's lives.
Yes. Because, you know, there's this distinction between reading text and being completely in the acquaintance of someone.
Right.
And time to time, this kind of acquaintance is so relevant that people just write about their acquaintances.
Right. Yeah. No, they're meaningful, right? They're meaningful relationships that people are recording and transmitting, keeping track of, right? The whole idea of the asnad or the silsila.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. تعلم عن تعلم عن تعلم عن. And yes, now we can jump to what the book you wrote about Kamara and not the biography did by Kamara on Omar Tal. This is extraordinary. His title. Already in his title. Please share it with us now. It's exactly what I was asking.
So ظهور الباسطين.
ظهور الباسطين.
في تاريخ السوادين.
في تاريخ السوادين. Yes, which you translate by.
Flowers in the gardens and the history of the blacks.
Flowers in the garden, the history of the blacks. What it is about.
Yeah. So ultimately, it's what I call a macro history of the world, but from a regional perspective, right? So we get, as we get in a lot of the classical histories like Tabari and Masoudi, this idea of kind of the creation of the world and of the emergence of Islam, etc. But then it also zooms in to tell us about the history of West Africa. Now, what's really remarkable about this history is that he writes it in the 1920s, right, in the colonial period in Senegal and Francophone West Africa. But he does so as colonial discourses are saying that Africa doesn't have either writing or history.
And he connects always travel with testimony in all what he was doing, right?
In a lot of ways, right? So, I mean, the intellectual culture of West Africa involved a lot of travel, right? The talab al-ilm, right?
And also testimony.
Absolutely. And so kind of the experiences that he had in his own studies from the Senegal River to the Beydan in what is now Mauritania to Guinea further south, he would collect his studies. And so he writes an autobiography called Tabshir al-Khaif, in which he is...
Tabshir al-Khaif. It sounds a little bit Sufi.
Oh, it's very Sufi, right? So Sheikh Musa Kamara, in this autobiography, he's making the claim that he is a wali, he is a saint of sorts, and he collects accounts and testimonies of experiences, of dreams, both that he has and that other people have that involve him. And it's a remarkable text, and unconventional in many ways, because the ways he's kind of so explicit.
But in this autobiography, he's talking about people he met, or?
Absolutely, which included well-known scholars of his age, but also colonial...
That's very important for us because he gave us a kind of context where he was growing up and learning.
Absolutely. So, for example, Sheikh Saad Buh, who is a famous member of the Fadiliya Sufi order.
Yeah.
He
was belonging to
Kamran was a disciple.
Kamara was belonging to an order?
So primarily Qadri.
Qadiri, yeah.
But he also kind of had some Tijani affiliations, it seems.
Okay.
But he's mostly remembered as a Qadri figure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And had he a position with French administration?
Yeah, so this is subject to some debate, some controversy, but he had close relationships. In the literature, this is described as the culte d'amitié, because he had a lot of correspondences with Maurice Delafosse, who is considered one of the godfathers of French African studies.
Yeah.
Also Henri Gadin, who was a lieutenant governor of Mauritania. And so he was very close to colonial officials, and sometimes in ways that are uncomfortable for people today in the post-colonial period.
Okay. And I know that your emphasis also the Islam France-Afrique, I put it this way. Because we don't think completely to put these terms together.
Right.
And what was your idea about this?
Yeah, I mean, I was really responding and thinking with someone like the American historian David Robinson, who long ago claimed that France presented itself as a Muslim power. Right, all the way back to kind of the campaign of Napoleon in Egypt and how he kind of presented himself as being aligned with Islam and being a protector of Islam. But a lot of French policy in West Africa and even in North Africa hinged on this idea that because of its subject populations were Muslim, it too was a Muslim power. And I think there are real legacies that continued for a long time in a certain kind of Francophone Islam.
But you are not only interested in this connection with France, you also are looking at comparative study with South Asia?
Yeah, I think actually this is probably one of my really important ways that I was trained. So my department was the Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies. And so that's a very unique way of organizing area studies. Some of it was for practical reasons, but it really attracted me to the program at Columbia because when I applied for graduate school, I took notice of how Africa and Blackness was seen as the negation of European civilization. And I almost thought about it in geometric terms. I said, well, how can you negate the negation? You identify a multiplicity of positive relationships. And so Africa's relationship to the Middle East, Africa's relationship to South Asia, and also kind of the tricontinental Latin America, these are really, was the strategy I had for trying to think Africa otherwise.
Yeah, and you just mentioned a kind of decolonizing knowledge, but you are also saying, I'm not completely involved in decolonizing knowledge, but of decolonizing the word itself.
Absolutely.
And yes, you said absolutely. So what is this shift to from decolonizing knowledge to decolonizing the word?
Yeah, well, I think I'm very much influenced by Ngugi wa Thiong'o on this point in his Something Torn, Something New, an African Renaissance. In the preface, I believe it is, he says something similar along these lines. And I agree completely. You know, first, I think we have to recognize that knowledge has never been the sole production of Europe. It is a mythology that Europe has used to understand itself, to justify its domination of the world. But it's never been true, right? There are great traditions of learning that, you know, in the Middle East, in Africa, in South Asia.
Circulation of manuscripts.
Circulation, all of this very rich tradition that constitute knowledge. And so I am not going to refuse that. That is my heritage. And so I'm going to actually use that, and I'm going to use the experiences that have been the result of colonization in engagement, in conflict and conversation with Europe in the Western tradition. But ultimately, the purpose of knowledge, right, is emancipation in my mind. And so, you know, the empire continues.
Humanity beyond humanities.
Yes, absolutely. I like that phrasing, right? That ultimately we need to find ourselves again. And one of the big problems humanity is facing, the planet is facing, is we have normalized inhumanity, right? The fact that there's an ongoing genocide in Gaza, the fact that there's an occupation of the West Bank continuously, the fact that even in the Americas, in the United States, that it is built on stolen land and built with stolen labor of enslaved Africans. These are issues that we have yet to address, let alone resolve. And so for me, the purpose of knowledge is an emancipation that will seek redress for these injustices.
I suppose that your students are completely in the search of this kind of recognition of all people around the world. And I think when they apply to be in university, they are not just looking for degrees, they are looking for emancipating themselves as well. Am I wrong?
Well, I think it's a mix, right?
Because
by the time they come to university in the American system, they've had 12, 13 years of a certain kind of conditioning that has really disempowered them. And so I see my role in part is to kind of give them some different horizons and some pathways to empower themselves.
Well, that's important.
And I feel very strongly about that.
And the intellectual devices are very important because they allow them to phrase completely the word you are taking care of in what you just said. And the reception of this kind of history you are making about Islam in Africa, in West Africa mainly, how is it received by your American students?
Yeah, well, funny enough, I've still in the process of figuring out of how to perform these translations and how to kind of show the relevance. And this semester was the first time I brought Kamara directly into the classroom. And I did it in the context of talking about genealogy. I used genealogy in my introductory course as a way of relating to the past. And, lo and behold, in the introduction of Kamara's autobiography, he provides a genealogy, both a corporeal one, right, a carnal one about who his family was, but also his intellectual genealogy. And these are great figures of thought that I think are useful. I'm trying to show students that, you are a part of something that go beyond the span of your life. And, at best, I hope that, we can learn how to pass the word on as the title of a book by Clint Smith in the U.S. says.
And even time to time, linking to the intellectual atmosphere of Malcolm X we were speaking about in the beginning of this program.
Yeah. I mean, I teach a course on Islam and the African American experience, which is global, but also it does end up kind of encountering and engaging with Malcolm X a lot.
What is now the horizon of your research? You are so young, you have this position now in Rutgers University, and we talk about all what you did already, even if you are so young, but now, what's the horizon?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in the development of a global Black studies.
Okay.
And I think that global Black studies has
to be... What do you mean by this?
So first and foremost, I'm trained as an Africanist, right? And Africa is at the center of my reflections, but I also recognize the way that race and Blackness has shaped the modern world. And so I want to do two things. I want to ground global Black studies in Africa, right? Quite physically and practically, but also I want to bring insights and experiences from the entire continent to reflect on the ways that race has kind of shaped our inheritances and figure out ways to create new paths, new trajectories forward.
Yes, and partnerships, now I'm talking to an academic person, partnerships with Africa, with the South.
Yeah.
I think that's very important to try to link many academic places in the world, and mainly in the, why not, of course, and in the US, and with African universities as well. Here we are now at the EMCSP Polytechnic in Morocco, and you know, this university is completely oriented toward Africa.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it will be how can I say, just a step to go to other countries and to try to connect with the US, because I think that doing you said you are Africanist, but it's very important also to be time to time on African soil, and to perceive, to see, to feel, and to be an acquaintance, as we were saying just about Musa Kamara.
Yeah, absolutely. The travel, the testimony.
Yes,
that's exactly part of it.
Continuing this idea of mobility.
Because
we are shaping knowledge completely different in different ways. When we are just in displacement, I may say.
And the famous historian Walter Rodney, the late Walter Rodney, Guyanese historian who spent a lot of time in East Africa, who was assassinated when he was running for president in 1980. But he uses this concept, grounding. Grounding, right? Grounding with my brothers is the name of the book. And this is, when I come to Morocco, and I've been coming to Morocco since 2007, I really love this country, one of my favorite countries, favorite places to be. What I'm trying to do when I come to UM6 is to practice grounding, right? To be with people, to think with people, and really do the hard work.
Iris Murdoch was always saying, great philosopher, she was saying, you know, we speak a lot about free will, but not that much about attention to people. And exactly what you are saying by this question of acquaintance with people, that shapes completely differently the way you are doing your own work in history.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being with us in this program. And I just say to all the audience, merci de votre écoute, merci, et je vous dis à une prochaine fois. À bientôt.